2022, and I'm doing something a little bit different today. As you see, oh look, there's Santa Claus at the background, or some bloke dressed up as Santa. Who would that be, I wonder? Anyway, I tried this thing a couple of minutes ago and it didn't really work, as it doesn't at times. So what the plan is today is just to go through like bowls. A lot of people think I think bowls. I think 10-pin bowling and down the alley and all that sort of stuff, which is good fun, mind you. But when I talk about bowls, I'm talking about down the bowlo. So they have greens, and they're synthetic greens, but they're greens nonetheless. And just so that some people know, I've got a few videos of what I took the other day, and well, just to show you what bowls is about. So there's 5 short videos, they're about 2 minutes each, and well, if you like them, go give bowls a try. If you don't, well, head down to your local bowling club and give it a go. It's good fun, and they sell beer. Howdy folks, this is Amos. This is a game of bowls called Consistency. A couple of mates having a go at it, and this is my first attempt at filming it. Working a bit better this time. This is my second attempt at this bowling thing. Last time the encoding was all over the place or something, and it was stop and start, and now it seems to be running pretty smoothly. Yeah, that'll be the shot. Well, that was end number 1, folks. Looks like the grey bowl's got it. As you can see, folks, it's all about getting close to that little yellow thing. And, well, here's the next video. This is end 4. Has he got it? Has he got it? Ooh. Pretty close to call. It's travelling by. Well, as you can see, that's real exciting. Maybe not. But anyway, I thought I'd show you another one. Here's video 3. You can see they've already sort of started by the time I get to filming because of what's called a marker during the game. Which means I've got to put a little yellow thingy in place and answer questions if the guys ask me. They don't ask, so I don't say nothing. Because I can't actually hear the bizzo at the moment, I might be talking over myself. This is end number 8. Don't you get that, folks? The epic battle versus the builder versus the sailor. I mention any names. Both retirees, of course, but it's an epic battle between the water and the land. At the moment it looks like the land's winning. This one's a bit wild. Here comes the sailor. Here comes the seaman. Is he going to get there? Here comes the sailor. Sailing in. Hey! He got it that time. Maybe, maybe not. Bugger. I had my mic turned off again, didn't I? You get that? Yes. That's where the left. Forgot the microphone again. I don't know what I'm doing here, do I? But anyway, it's getting exciting, isn't it? And, well, one more video to show you. And well, I might show something else anyway, just to do something different. Show you some of the stuff that I normally watch on the box, if you like. But in the meantime, here's the last video, and hopefully I'll be right turning my camera, my mic on and off. But yeah, it is what it is. Cheers, folks. Folks, this is the score's changed slightly. It's the last end, but it's score is now 147, 123 against the Grey Bowls. Well, the Grey Bowls got the shot. So we'll just see what happens here, eh? Could be the last end, maybe not. Yeah, never know. Black Bowls are fighting back. Oh, yes, he's just got in there. The Black Bowls are going to stop the Grey Bowls from getting 3 points. So the Black Bowls need to do the stuff. How's this one going? Oh, looks pretty dangerous. Yep. Black Bowl seems to be not enough grass, as they say in bowls lingo. I'm going to go around the back. Here he comes. Coming along well. Has he got it? Is he going to slow down? Yes, round of applause for that bowl. Here comes the Grey Bowl. What can he do? Oh, looking good. It's coming in. Has it got the weight? Has it got the weight? No. Ooh, it's enough to get 3 points though. No, just know something. Oh, the Black Bowls spat the dummy. Is it going to work? Oh, he's got one of them. Oh, too late though. He gets, yeah, he gets 3. Job done. Well, that was that, folks. That was, for those who think bowls is 10 pin, this has got lawn bowls. And, well, it's my first attempt at filming something sporting. And went a bit better this time. I had another go a little bit earlier, and it was all sketchy and drop frames and things like that. And I played around with video settings, and now it's working. I don't know what the quality's like, but anyway. I might just open up a window on DK's page. He's the man that I normally watch, and he normally restreams me doing whatever it is I'm doing, but he's busy doing other stuff today, so I thought I'll restream him, something that don't do that often, but let's see if I can, there we go. Let's get the volume happening, I guess, might help.
That refused to hire blacks. That's the very beginning of some of the unions. We like to think of it as like the Wobblies and the Wildcat riots and the miners in the 1890s, but no, it started in the 1860s and 1870s. With free blacks in the North attempting to find work and it being impossible for them to do so because they couldn't find a single employer. It's also important, I think we already stressed this, both of these last two bullet points kind of just in general conversation before, but, the North denied voting rights over and over again. That the northern states that had a large black population did not want to ratify the 13th Amendment. They were a vile and racist system, but also it's important to understand that while this war may not have been about slavery ideologically from the North in the beginning, and while that might not have been the main justification, it was mostly economic factors and aggression and the loss of power in the Senate as well as the House of Representatives. All of those things were indeed tied to slavery.
And wasn't there a lot of sexism too, right? Technically, because women didn't have, like you said before, as much rights as men. And I remember reading a lot of abolitionist writings, and there were a lot of activists at the time talking about free love, free land, all sorts of different things connected to slavery that maybe came as a result or had to do with chattel slavery.
Absolutely. I mean, Frederick Douglass was a prominent feminist. Well, you would say suffragist, right? But early feminist, right? I mean, he went to a lot of conferences, and he's even quoted in I can't remember is it Wichita Falls? I can't remember the name of the big suffrage conference.
I think it was Wichita.
I want to say it's Wichita Falls, but I'm going off of memory here, not off of the slides or anything. But he was quoted in something that you hear today, right? Which is this idea of stand ground epistemology that you hear from like the Marxists, right? This idea that like, it's time for women to speak, but at least then it was fucking true, right? It was true that women had very little voice and power. They had family power, obviously. They had purchasing power. They had some form of legislative power in the way that they convinced men to do things. But yeah, the early kind of feminist inklings in American history were deeply tied with abolitionists.
It was Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls, thank you. It was in Wichita Falls. Thank you, Seneca Falls.
It sounds to me a little bit like it's kind of hard title people as well because you have Republicans who are feminists, and then you have Northerners who are racist, who are yet supposed to end slavery. Like, it's really hard to put a label on these people. And then we have a lot of anarchists who were abolitionists back then in that time period, and a lot of them are called utilitarianists and socialists, and yet
Senator Spooner, for example.
Yeah, and yet what did they want? They just wanted to end slavery. They just wanted to teach some simple morals, and they get grouped into these different ideologies. Does that even accurately represent what they actually believed or what they actually did?
I mean, I'm a pretty hardcore individualist, and I'm sure you are as well. We use these categories for ease of trying to understand, right? None of us were alive back then. Obviously, we have primary source documents, and it's one of the first wars that was ever fought, right? Which really shows the bloody nature of it. I didn't put those photos in this per se, but if you want to look, it was the first kind of awakening to that. So we do have photographs, we do have primary source documents and letters and things like that. But at a certain time, you have to try and categorize similar movements and ideas into categories in order to try and make any sense of this and do the best that you can to try not to bias it.
Yeah, I was just saying, it sounds like so far it's really hard. Like, we see the North already is contradicting what we are told the North is about, or Abraham Lincoln, what we're told is about him. We might be lied to. We might not even understand what they really did. So I just think...
Right, and you've got Democrats, and you've got Copperheads, and you've got, you've got Northern Democrats that weren't Copperheads. You've got Republicans. You also have the Radical Republicans, which was a caucus within the Republicans that were not so much abolitionists as they were people that deeply wanted to punish the South. Thaddeus Stevens being the most prominent example, that wanted to punish and hurt and harm, and for whatever reason, deeply hated the South and were very pro-war. And yet, they were the closest things to abolitionists, because any moral argument that they could make to attack and harm and maim, dismember, and burn the South was an argument that they were willing to make. But they were corrupt, corporatist, greedy, pro-war people, and yet they were the closest. They were some of the closest things to abolitionists at the
I
time.
think
It's a very
hard, you know?
confusing morally.
It is a little confusing to me because a lot of the reading I did on the abolitionists, a lot of them were also pacifist and they used religious or arguments for
The
morality.
Quakers,
Yeah.
definitely the Quakers for
them
sure.
too.
They were a big part of the abolitionist movement, and they were pacifists.
The New England Non-Resistance Society, non-resistance, they had a whole newspaper about, do no harm, even like no self-defense either. They changed their mind on that later on. But at first they were like, nobody should self-defend themselves against an aggression. And it was quite interesting having that stance. Lysander Spooner never had that stance to begin with. He was like, self-defense is always essential. So it was quite interesting how you saw clashes within the movements. And of course you would expect that in anything. But I don't, it's really hard, I think, to kind of categorize them as one people. And at least they can come together and say, slavery was wrong. It was just, how did they put that into the world and how they go about doing that. Maybe it's similar to the anarchists, and how they fight over different factions within. And some people think they think radically different from others, but yet they're all kind of, heading in the same direction with anti-state, anti-statism.
Right. Well, if these things have piqued your interest, you are in for a world of hurt because we're about to get into the nitty gritty. And
All right,
I'm going to say some things that you are likely going to doubt.
All right.
But I promise that this is. So let's begin first with the tariffs.
Oh, boy.
Now, before the moral tariff of 1861, the South paid 87% of all taxes in the United States. I'm going to repeat that, 87% of all taxes, despite making up less than a third of the population.
Darn.
Okay. Moving up to 1816, tariff sat at around 15%. Now, in order to pay for the war for 1812, there was supposed to be a temporary tariff, which was the tariff of 1816. But as we all know, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So, of course, they stayed at roughly 20%. So we had this encroaching as the South began to lose power in the House of Representatives because of population. They were unable to defend themselves against these tariffs. Okay. Now, this is where it really starts to get interesting, where we understand this process of slavery and free white slaves as new states come in. The Missouri Compromise, right? And things of that nature, is because if the South loses the Senate and is unable to maintain any position in the Senate, they have no protection whatsoever from the North that is making them pay almost 90% of all of the taxes in America.
Scott on his Discord channel
North, so this back and forth about whether or not a new state will be a slave state is in many ways an economic state, because a slave state is one that mass produces raw materials, and those raw materials are sold to Europe. And so as the tariffs occur, what is occurring is that the North is trying to sell goods and services, and high tariffs benefit them because now they can outcompete the goods. Sorry, I don't know why I said services. The goods that are shipped from Europe, they can now sell them cheaper to the South. But the problem is that once you have a tariff, well, Europe responds by having their own tariff, which makes it more and more expensive in order to sell those raw materials to Europe. And so you have this constant fight where the North is trying to industrialize and the South isn't, because of a slavery-based economy. And so the tariffs are overwhelmingly disproportionately affecting the South.
because they're using slaves.
But you have the tariff of 1828. And then you had an even worse tariff that was proposed in 1832, but eventually they came to a tariff that was
Is he honestly just saying he's upset that tariffs were placed against the fuckers who were using slaves?
compromise at 1833, which normalized tariffs at around 22, 24%. That certain products don't come into the tariff estimation just yet. Now, in 1842, the North really begins an entirely new economic philosophy. Northern corrupt politicians that own stock in railway companies and own ironworks companies and own textile factories want tariffs bad. They want to engage in a mercantilist system. And the South is fighting for laissez-faire capitalism. They are fighting for free trade. They are fighting for no tariffs and no taxes as much as possible. And it gets really bad in 1842. There is a 40% tariff. So imagine a 40% right off the top tax for everything that you're trying to do with your economy, forcing you to buy goods from the north, making it exceedingly expensive to buy anything from Europe, and everything you sell gets taxed at 40% because they respond with their own similar tariffs. Now, after the Walker tariff, after 1842, what you begin to have is economic prosperity in America. Industrialization is kind of working, part of that because of economic protectionism. But you also have the beginning of the gold rush, especially in the early 1850s. And because of some of the compromises and because of some of the political power and because of economic prosperity, and because the Whig Party is starting to collapse and lose relevancy, what you see is the Democrats, which are mostly in the South, obviously Martin Van Buren, creating the Democrats, use certain economic positions to have Northern Democrats as well. But the South is more heavily Democrat. You start to see Democrats get enough power to rail this back a little bit. So in 1846, you have the Walker tariffs, which cut tariffs back. And in 1857, at the peak of the gold rush, right, you have the tariff of 1857, which brings it back down to 15 to 24%, depending on the port and where you are. Now, that is still an insane tax to anyone listening. I mean, can you imagine any goods that you're trying to sell or that you're trying to purchase from outside being taxed at a fifth or a quarter of the price, going straight to the government? Well, this was the super low taxes.
Yeah, no wonder.
Now, the last tariff, right. Now, we have to talk about the Panic of 1857, which we will talk about in the next slide. But just for the sake of organization, in 1860, when secession talks start happening, the South realizes that the Republicans have completely swept the House and the Senate, and that they have no power to stop impending tariffs. After the Panic of 1857, there is a lot of propaganda that is saying the South did this. Republicans are saying that the economic collapse is all the South's fault because the tariffs weren't high enough. And it's the Democrats' fault for not having high enough tariffs. We need to return to 40, 50% tariffs. And one of the biggest people that was a proponent of this was someone that was an extreme mercantilist known as Henry Charles Carey. He was an economic advisor to President Lincoln, and he was one of the people pushing harder than anybody that we have got to have massive tariffs on the South. This is a major, major part to the secession and the beginning of the Civil War. And anyone that tries to say that this is lost cause propaganda need only look at these numbers and imagine what it would be like to have this fight back and forth for your economy and economic protectionism against a group of corrupt politicians that we're going to get into just how corrupt they were here in a minute, but corrupt politicians that own stock in railway companies and ironwork facilities that are financially gaining by making the South pay nearly 90% of all of the taxes, saying we need more, and we've got to tax the South more and more, as the North is industrializing and the South is completely stagnant in its growth.
Yeah, well, listen, I just want to say this is very powerful. I want to go over time with this for sure, and I think we can take as much time as we need for this because nobody else is going over no one else is going over the history, and I think this is really essential that we do this and go deep like you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing right now with us and bring us through
from the economics perspective, this is great. So we'll kind of tie in a lot of this toward the end. Please.
Yeah. Let me get to the Panic of 1857 because it plays a big role in this.
Yeah.
So in the 1850s, you had the gold rush, and as I explained, this allowed for the tariff of 1857, which was a reduction from the Walker tariff I forgot the year, 1846. Sorry. So this was a reduction in tariffs, right? And the gold rush was a big part of that. They had surplus money. They didn't need as much money, and so the arguments justifying high tariffs didn't really work on the voter base as much, right? You know, if you have all this extra money, why do you have to keep increasing taxes? And so they had lower taxes. And what was occurring during the gold rush was a lot of corruption of the state working with corporations. And in many times, the owners of those corporations were senators and congressmen up north. What you had was this phenomenon known as paper railroads. What was happening was that because there was so much money coming in from the gold rush, and there was banks here that had secured land to build railroads from the government, and then the government would then sell that land to someone else later. They would sell land very cheap to one individual so that they could get a large bank loan to build a railroad.
Taxes need to be reduced and used efficiently. You have no idea where any of the money from your taxes goes to. Trillions missing every year or two. Trillions unaccounted for. Should be at 10% of your wage that goes towards fixing your fucking community. I don't have a problem with that. They don't do that.
And then they would never build that railroad. They just use it as a justification to get large sums of money from banking institutions, and the state worked in this this shell game of well, that's a bubble waiting to happen. The SS Central America sinks in 1857. The SS Central America was a ship that was moving products around and was also moving gold from the gold rush. It had 30,000 pounds of gold on it. At the time, that was $56 million. In today's dollars, that's $1.9 trillion in gold that sank in the sea. Killed over 400 people. It was the worst naval disaster that had ever occurred in American history, and it almost exclusively caused the Panic of 1857. And the reason is because it collapsed the Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company, which was a major insurance company that was insuring a lot of this gold. But once that company crashes, and once $1.9 trillion of gold gets immediately deleted from the economy, and all of these people have debts that need to be paid with this missing gold, and it was also the first world economic panic because it affected the British market deeply. And what the Britain
gold back? I was just curious. I mean,
no, they couldn't. It was sunk at the bottom of the sea. They didn't. They didn't have submarines back then.
Okay.
We still don't have all that gold. I don't know that. I don't know that. I think someone may have supposedly found it or whatever, but like we haven't excavated it, and then people are doubting whether or not they actually found it. Like I've tried to look up like where it is, and there's nothing substantive. But I could be wrong. Because people are out there looking for it, because it's $1.9 trillion worth of gold. Now, what ended up happening in Britain is that they actually circumnavigated the Bank Charter Act of 1844, and they took themselves secretly off of a gold standard to try and inflate the currency to prevent a panic. Unfortunately, people found out about it. Journalists found out about it, and it was the press went wild. People then immediately did a run on the banks in England to try and get all their money out and get it in gold. It's because they knew that there wasn't because insurance is collapsing and banking institutions are collapsing. Henry Charles Carey, who was an economist and an economic protectionist and a mercantilist. He writes a famous book. I can't remember the name of the book right now because I was dumb enough to not put it in the slide. But he writes a book blaming the South and low tariffs. And it is the Republicans begin to campaign not on freeing the slaves, not on free white labor as one of their biggest issues. They were campaigning on tariffs, on massive taxes on the South to bring about a betterment of the economy. And this is part of what scared the shit out of the South, because they knew massive taxes that they couldn't afford were coming, and they were being blamed for a panic that had nothing to do with them.
Wow. So can people reaffirm what you're saying here? Could they research this?
Absolutely. You could look up, you can even look up a Wikipedia article on the SS Central America. You can look up it seems like most of them kind of seceded before this, and the other states didn't secede until Fort Sumter, right? Which is when once the North basically declared war on the South, then they decided to secede because they knew they were next. It was not an ad valorem tariff, which is really important. Ad valorem tariffs, which is what all of the other tariffs were at the time, was a blanket tariff on everything. The moral tariff specifically targeted goods that were produced in the South. So they specifically said, oh, we're going to put a cotton tariff. We're going to put a tobacco tariff. We're going to put tariffs on these things, but we're not going to, let's say, do a wheat tariff because the northern economy depends upon wheat sales. So they would allow themselves to not have the same retaliation for selling food to Europe, but make sure that the tariffs disproportionately and deeply affected the South. And so if you look up the moral tariff, what you will see is that the moral tariff was a 37% tariff. But you got to dig in deeper than that, because that's an average. It's an average of all of the tariffs. It's terrifying, yeah.
This is crazy. Oh, here we go.
So
Lincoln.
The hero Lincoln. The hero, the great emancipator. I'm sure abolitionists love the great emancipator that finally ended slavery. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the more, I picked out some of the more egregious and important things. First of all, he was a white separatist and a vile racist. He tried to get blacks removed from Kansas because he didn't believe that the races should mix and that the races would never get along. Though he wasn't the worst of the time. He wasn't like a Southern slave owner that thought that they were subhuman and that like thought you could beat and rape them whenever you wanted. But he was a white supremacist and he was a racist, which is a weird thing to say nowadays. He was a white supremacist, but not one of the bad ones.
And this you can find in his writings, or
yes, yeah, you can find tons of writing. I mean, you can just look at his inaugural address, right? In slavery, so long as they preserve the Union. But he also tried to send a lot of people to Liberia. He was one of those individuals that thought we should send them back to Africa. And in fact, he was going to finance another large shipment of blacks to Africa, 3 days after he was killed, assassinated, right? Like that was a big part of his plan, was trying to get people to voluntarily go back to Africa because they would be better off there, specifically Liberia. He also arrested over 300 journalists during the Civil War. Journalists that were anti-war or journalists that wrote pieces that were against the Unionist Party or claimed anything that he didn't like. He just put them in prison. This was something that he did to silence the media and try and win elections and try and, kind of the lesser of two evils, right? Right. It's kind of like, the ends justify the means. These people are trying to stop us from preserving the Union, so we'll put them in rest. One of the most egregious things that I think Lincoln ever did, and you can look this up as well, is Copperhead Democrats. And what he did in one instance was he arrested them. He put them in Confederate uniforms, the men, and then he put them in chains and marched them through the streets as captured Confederates, and even took, I don't know that it was him specifically. We don't know that it was, we don't have any evidence that he directly gave the order, but during this process, people were able to pay money to punch them.
This event is called the end of
all for the good old war propaganda. Now, in the election of 1864, there's a lot of back and forth ideas of election fraud. This was the first time that we were using large-scale mail-in voting. And the soldiers, for whatever reason, at a time where the South, the first year and a half, up until almost 1863, was winning every single solitary battle. And then they were winning in the West, but there was this long, drawn-out conflict. It seemed like the war might never end. This McClellan was running on a campaign of stopping the war. He just wanted to end this war. Let the South be who the South is. We got to end this war. And there was mail-in ballot system that the troops were using that required the signature of the troop, the signature of a witness, the signature of their officer, as well as the postman's signature when they picked it up, and that same postman was required to sign when they dropped him off at the next location. So there was deep signature of chain of custody, witnesses, and the officers. Now, he sent investigators out and was claiming that there was a ton of election fraud, and that McClellan and the Copperheads and the Democrats were trying to cheat in the election. Now, he's running for the Unionist Party at the time because the Republicans were so unpopular that he knew that he would not likely win. So they created a new party, which was essentially a pro-war party, the Unionist Party. Now, this could be true, or it could be the other way around. What we do know is that there was troops. Kind of, we don't know who was really engaging in the election fraud here. What we do know after that is that Clinton sent Lincoln sent soldiers to the polls. He made sure that there were soldiers at polling stations, conveniently at polling stations that tend to vote Democrat. It is likely, if it was indeed Lincoln's people that were engaging in voter fraud in the mail-in ballots, and that if he hadn't sent in soldiers at the polls, it's very likely McClellan would have won the presidency. The war would have been over at that point, and we would have two Americas, quite literally. But that's not what happened. And we don't know, but we do know that there was definitely election interference and voter intimidation and possibly election fraud. Now, Fort Sumter, I think most people know the story of Fort Sumter. I don't want to go too detailed into the first battle of the Civil War, but Seward, who later developed the greenback, was his treasurer, was telling Lincoln a federal base in their land, saying that this is federal land and you don't get to do anything about it. Well, the South obviously couldn't let that happen, or that would mean that they were under the purview and the taxation of the federal government. They had just seceded. And they were even saying, look, we'll work out a deal to pay you for this land. He was rejecting deals to pay for the land and instead brought in troops to resupply Fort Sumter, which forced the South, of course, to fire on Fort Sumter. And thus we have the beginning of the Civil War. States like Virginia, for example, had not seceded yet. Many states had not entered into the Confederacy until Lincoln and the Union had already started a war. So, for example, if you want to say, well, Virginia was a southern state, it seceded so that it could protect slavery. It seceded because the North started a war in the Carolinas and against other states and would have to go through their states in order to fight this war in the economy from that issue. But it was a genius stroke by Lincoln if Lincoln wanted to preserve the Union. One of the other things that I find really interesting is that McClellan had a plan to win the Civil War, if necessary, years ago. And his plan was to go up the James River into Richmond and to use some of the new kind of submarine technology that they were developing. This was the first time that we saw ironclads and the first time that we saw submarines. And the idea was that they were going to use submarines and ironclads to attempt to go up the James River ahead of their naval fleet and try and lock ships in place before a battle so that they could easily win and take Richmond, Virginia's port, and then move in to capture Richmond from there. Great. Now, you could say that he cared about preserving the Union so deeply that he didn't want McClellan to win at any cost because he needed to preserve the Union, but he certainly didn't care about those soldiers.
Yeah. Justifying violence, the state, which is not surprising.
Always.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. A lot of the themes you were talking about, I kind of just get flashbacks to nowadays and the way people take the political process and claims different things of different parties. I mean, we've been doing this for so long now. It's actually insane to me how long we've gone on doing the same process. And it seems to me that Lincoln was involved with a lot more than even just this, but this is definitely a lot of it. I think, I know we talked about this perspective before, but he signed many different documents, claiming people as persons and legal texts. I mean, there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes that, like making the United States a corporation. And so it was just very interesting, these different perspectives I hear about people, about Abraham Lincoln. So
yeah, he's not a good actor. Great speechwriter, though, and an amazing lawyer. We'll give him that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if being an amazing lawyer is necessarily high praise, but he was nevertheless.
So why do you go into why he dies or why he was killed? Do you have like a certain reason why you think? Is there any part of the narrative that we're told?
I don't. To be honest, I don't know. I think John Wilkes Booth was just an angry and deranged man. It was probably one of the worst things that could have happened for the South because Lincoln, as evil as he was nowhere near as corrupt and evil as some of the Republicans that led during Reconstruction. And I think, one of the biggest factors is that Lincoln specifically believed that Southern soldiers were his death. But I want to try and speed this. There's a lot more to talk about. So and how bad this war was. Relative to today's numbers, it's 17.8 actually. Pardon me. Oh, I can't change it because it's PDF, but it's actually 17.8. If the South's numbers were relative to its current population, They lost 17.8 million people. That's how many people died in the Civil War in the South. That's not how many actually died, right?
Yeah.
There's quite a few hundred. It was a few 100,000. But you have to look at relative population, like percentile. If we were to go to Civil War today, and it was to be enacted in much the same way, it would mean 17 million people dying in the South, right? It's an insane amount. I mean, what is that, like 30 COVIDs?
Thanks. Yeah, roughly.
Roughly 30 COVIDs in the South alone.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be an insane amount of death.
Like compared to World War II, right? World War II, I think, was a lot more than that, but I mean, that's still...
It's the highest in American history per capita.
Yeah.
More American. Both in the North and the South, prisoners of war were starved to death. In the South, in Andersonville, Georgia, 12,000 to 12,500 Union soldiers died, and they were starved to death, and they also died from
Probably mic on again. Looks like we're having some issues with the internet connection or something again. So I'll just drop it there for tonight. And well, I've enjoyed the bowls stuff before, and well, a bit of the stuff that I'm watching. It's a guy called Corey who's doing a thing in the End of Slavery Summit. You can find it on his YouTube site, which is called Nature is the Answer, something like that. Yeah. Have a look at that, folks. Nature is the Answer. Corey, not sure his surname, whatever. I think I know, but at a point of time. So that's it for tonight, folks. Be back again Thursday. Won't be doing another show today. Next Sunday I'll get back to do a big picture. Not today. So in the meantime, folks, hope you enjoyed today's little show. Oh look, there's Fred again. And yeah, be good to each other in Lakesh.